One of history's most famous psychics predicted hundreds of events through sleep talking. From humble beginnings in small-town Kentucky, Edgar Cayce grew up to become one of history's most notable psychics, helping to inspire philosophies that continue today. And he predicted some of the 20th century's biggest events, from the disastrous stock market crash of 1929 to the unprecedented carnage of World War II. Cayce, though, could only make his predictions while in a trance, and he wasn't exactly a reliable source. In fact, for every future event that he accurately foretold, he described several that never came to pass. Despite his variable success rate, though, the man dubbed the Sleeping Prophet went on to become a household name. A century after Cayce's birth, the New Age movement emerged in the West, echoing the spiritualist beliefs espoused by the Sleeping Prophet. And in this manner, his legacy has continued down the ages. But was the nature of his mysterious trances? And how did they help him predict the future? Born in the Appalachian Mountains near the town of Beverly, Kentucky, Cayce was part of a large farming family. But from an early age, it was clear that he was different from his 5 siblings. According to reports, he was prone to seeing the transparent spirit of his dead grandfather and claimed to be on friendly terms with the little folk. When he was just 10 years old, Cayce attended church for the first time, quickly developing something of an obsession with Christianity. Apparently, he devoured the Bible, reading it over and over again. Then, 2 years later, he was visited by what many would refer to as a heavenly apparition. According to author Thomas Segru, who published a biography of Cayce in 1943, the young boy was visited by an entity which took the form of a winged woman. And although he was afraid at first, the mysterious spirit told him that she was there to answer his prayers. When she asked him what he desired, he replied that he wanted to spend his life in the service of others. So far, so strange, but things were about to get even weirder. While angry at his son's poor academic performance, the story goes, Cayce's father lashed out. But as the boy fell to the floor, he heard the voice of the same winged woman telling him to go to sleep. Obediently, he placed his head on the book that he was studying and drifted off. Later, when he awoke, Cayce found that he had retained all of the information in the book. And by studying in this manner, he soon became a brilliant student, rising to the top of the class. But just as he began to excel in academic matters, he suffered a blow to his health that nobody had expected. According to reports, Cayce had been playing sports at school when a rogue ball struck him, injuring the base of his spine. Afterwards, he began to act in a way that has only been described as strange. That was quite the claim about a boy who already allegedly communed with ghosts on a regular basis. But what happened next would elevate Cayce from spooky student to potential prophet. Apparently, he had a dream in which he was able to identify the specific ailment that he was suffering from and figure out how to cure it. On waking, he relayed this information to his family, who promptly whipped up the treatment. Shockingly, it was successful. Despite his apparent clairvoyant ability, though, Cayce was still a child from a low-income family. And like many of his contemporaries, he left school after completing the 9th grade. By 1900, he was engaged to a woman named Gertrude Evans and embarking on a career as an insurance salesman. But his plans hit a stumbling block when he contracted severe laryngitis that rendered him unable to speak. Bizarrely, Cayce turned to hypnotism, rather than traditional medicine, to cure his condition. After some early success, reports claim, he met with a man named Al Lane, who put him into a trance. And while under, he is said to have explained exactly what needed to be done to ease his suffering. Apparently, Lane followed the directions, and upon rousing from his trance, the patient's laryngitis was cured. Intrigued, the hypnotist asked about his own medical conditions. And again, Cayce delivered an accurate diagnosis and prescribed a cure, all while seemingly unconscious. Once awake, though, he claimed to have no recollection of what had transpired. Had Cayce, a man without any medical training, suddenly developed the abilities of a qualified physician? Certainly, there were plenty who believed so. And as word of his strange abilities spread, people began to seek out the advice of the so-called sleeping prophet, despite his apparent reluctance to publicize his talent. According to reports, Cayce feared that the advice he delivered while in a trance might be harmful and could even result in a patient's death. But with every successful diagnosis, his confidence began to grow. For a long time, though, he refused to accept payment for what became known as his readings. Instead, Cayce took a job at a bookshop in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in order to support himself and Gertrude, whom he married in June 1903. By the time that their son Hugo arrived in 1907, he had switched careers again and taken up photography. But on 2 separate occasions, his studios were destroyed by fire. Still unwilling to charge for what he viewed as his gift, Cayce even tried to support his family by selling a card game of his own invention. Called Pit, it can still be purchased today, but its success did not provide enough to support the growing family. And eventually, the reluctant prophet agreed to offer readings in return for donations. By this point, it wasn't only medical diagnoses that Cayce was doling out from his trances. For example, when printing tycoon Arthur Lammers visited for a reading in 1923, he came away with information about his alleged past lives. And the following year, the prophet's predictions helped the wealthy Blumenthal family make a fortune on the stock market. And Cayce was issuing warnings, too. In fact, the first of his most famous predictions came in 1925 when he told a young physician to guard his fortune against the adverse forces set to emerge in 1929. Of course, that was the year that the stock market crashed, and the prophet's words of caution saved brokers such as the Blumenthals hundreds of thousands of dollars. The following year, Cayce issued another prediction which is startling by modern standards. According to his official website, it read, "As the heat or cold in various parts of the Earth is radiated off and correlated with reflection in the Earth's atmosphere, this in its action changes the currents or streams in the ocean." In other words, Cayce appears to have described the El Niño and La Nina effects long before scientists fully understood the phenomena. And it wasn't the first time that he would make a prediction, only to have it proved right by experts much further down the line. For instance, in 1927 he allegedly foresaw doctors' ability to diagnose diseases from blood samples, years before the idea became mainstream. That same year, Cayce established a hospital in Virginia Beach, some 750 miles east of Bowling Green. There, he continued to provide medical readings and issue prophecies about the future, many of which appeared to come true. And in 1935, for years before the outbreak of World War II, he accurately predicted the carnage that was about to unfold. Apparently, Cayce was in one of his usual trances when his patient quizzed him about global politics. According to the Cayce website, he responded, "As to the affairs of an international nature, these we find are in a condition of great anxiety on the part of many, not only as individuals but as to nations. This will make for the taking of sides, as it were, by various groups or countries or governments," Cayce continued. "This will be indicated by the Austrians, Germans, and later the Japanese joining in their influence, unseen and gradually growing to those affairs where there must become, as it were, almost a direct opposition. For these will gradually make for a growing of animosities." Of course, by the time that this prophecy was issued, Hitler had already risen and the Third Reich was well underway. And perhaps it wouldn't have taken a genius to predict that things were about to get out of hand. All the same, this particular example is often cited as irrefutable evidence of Cayce's supernatural abilities. The following year, Cayce issued another prediction which has been latched onto by his supporters ever since. When asked about any changes that might happen with the turn of the millennium, he responded, "When there is a shifting of the poles, or a new cycle begins." And in the early 21st century, much discussion has been dedicated to just such an event. In fact, the so-called shifting of the poles has become a cornerstone of the New Age movement, said to coincide with a shift of the human consciousness towards a more metaphysical realm. But again, Cayce's prediction might not have been so impressive as it first appears. After all, evidence for magnetic reversals had already begun to emerge by the 1920s. In 1939, Cayce predicted the deaths of 2 serving presidents amid a time of great political strife. And when Franklin Roosevelt died of a hemorrhage while in office 6 years later, followed by the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, many believed that these prophecies had again come to pass. In 1943, Segru published There is a River, his comprehensive biography of Cayce. And on the back of its success, demand for readings increased even further. At one point, reports claim, the prophet was seeing as many as 6 people a day. Later that year, he gave an interview to Coronet magazine and began receiving inquiries from the families of soldiers missing in action in World War II. This increase in workload, though, took a toll on Cayce's health. And after collapsing at work in August 1944, he retreated to the mountains of Virginia with his wife. Months later, he suffered a fatal stroke, passing away on January 3, 1945. This was just 2 days before the burial date that he himself had predicted. In the years since Cayce's death, he has become something of a folk hero. And the influence of his thinking can still be seen in the tenets of the New Age movement, almost a century down the line. But was the sleeping prophet really able to predict the future and heal people from his trance-like state? Today, critics are quick to point out that not all of Cayce's prophecies came true. For example, in 1944, he predicted that China would become the cradle of Christianity within the next 20 years. And on another occasion, he foretold that world peace would emanate from Russia, something which has so far proved to be pretty far from the truth. On top of that, many have cast doubt on Cayce's so-called psychic healing abilities as well. After all, he was unable to help his second son, Milton, who died at just 2 months old. And even though various books about the prophet have attributed numerous cures to his readings, there appears to be little solid evidence to support these claims. According to Temple University mathematics professor John Allen Paulos, who wrote a review of Sidney K. Kirkpatrick's 2001 Cayce biography, there is no actual data on how many people the prophet cured. And even in the cases where his methods appeared to work, success could just as likely be attributed to factors such as natural recovery and the placebo effect. But where Cayce really courted controversy and stirred up the passion of his New Age followers was with his more outlandish prophecies and beliefs. Perhaps most famously, he predicted that the lost city of Atlantis would be rediscovered in the late 60s somewhere in the region of Bimini in the Bahamas. Supporters of Cayce felt vindicated, then, when divers made a shock discovery in the waters off Bimini in 1968. At about 5.5 meters, reports claim, they spotted what appeared to be a man-made pavement running along the ocean floor. And although its exact origins are still unknown, many believe that this so-called road was once part of Atlantis. In fact, the lost city appears to have cropped up several times in Cayce's various predictions. And according to reports, he believed that reincarnated souls from the technologically advanced civilization of Atlantis were responsible for many of the 20th century's industrial developments. And that wasn't even the weirdest of his theories. Apparently, Cayce also predicted that an Atlantean death ray would be repurposed by the United States in 1958, confusingly, a decade before he believed the lost city would be discovered. And he was also a proponent of polygenism, the idea that the human race evolved from several different origins. According to Cayce, variations in skin color could be explained by these different origins. But he didn't stop there. In his writings, he also claimed that one of Earth's 5 races originated in Atlantis and that crossbreeding between spiritual entities and animals had resulted in the existence of 12-foot-tall giant beings. Despite his outlandish theories, though, Cayce is still revered throughout the New Age movement. And even though there is little evidence to support his claims, many still believe that he really could cure people through his unique brand of sleep-talking. But to others, he was little more than a fraud, happy to cash in on the public's insatiable appetite for pseudoscience.